I'm Angie McCarty. I'm one of the pastors on staff at Resurrection, and I am so excited to be with you today. My very first job in ministry was as a middle school youth director. I absolutely loved it. And the passion I realized I had for ministry while I was working with youth is how I realized God wanted me to be a pastor. That was 32 years ago. I know that that's really hard to believe because I look so young, but seriously, I love youth. I love teaching youth. I lead a 6th grade small group on Wednesday nights as a volunteer because I love you guys so much. I have 6 kids of my own. The youngest is 15, so I'm gonna have to find a way to keep hanging out with youth, especially when all the kids are out of the house. I am also super excited today because I get to talk to you about one of my favorite topics. You've been talking a lot about what it means to be a Christian. You're being given the opportunity to make some really big decisions about your faith through confirmation, and I am so proud of you. Because we are Christians, I think it's really important for us to not only know about our faith, but also about other faiths that exist in this world. Did you know that some people estimate there are more than 4,000 religions in this world? Most of those religions fall into 5 major categories. So there are 5 major religions in this world. Christianity is one of them. And then the number gets even bigger. Some people would say that there are 45,000 Christian denominations or smaller groups that have beliefs and practices that are a little bit different from each other within Christianity. That is massive. As a Christian, we get to choose how we respond to these other world religions. We can say, "You're totally different than me. You don't believe in Jesus. I'm right. You're wrong. We can't live in peace with each other." You may snicker at this because you've been brought up to accept people in a different way. But there are plenty of Christians who would say this. Or we can say, "You're a human being, and I respect you as someone who is created by God no matter what you believe. I love you, and I wish you well." You can tell how I approach this topic, right? Today we'll talk about 2 of the world's major religions and how they differ from Christianity and how they're similar. But first, let me tell you about my friend Susan, who I meet at the gym 3 times a week. She is a great person and a wonderful friend. She's Jewish. Before we started hanging out, I had no idea that someone like her, living in Leawood, Kansas, would feel that people look down on her because she's Jewish. When she shares with someone that she's Jewish, she says the response people give most often is, "Oh, I've never met a Jew before." Well, this is not really hurtful, it's just kind of a dumb response. What's worse, though, is a story she told me about her son, who asked a new student at his school if he was from Germany. The 7th grader responded, "No, but if I was, you'd be in a camp," referring to a concentration camp where Jews were killed during World War II. My next door neighbors follow the faith of Islam. We would call them Muslim. They are marvelous people. They've shared with me what it's been like to be in Overland Park as people whose skin is darker than mine. They've been booed. They worry about their children being teased or bullied at school because of their faith. She is a dentist and he is a doctor, and they've had people not see them professionally because they're Muslim. When we first moved into our house and I saw them, I knocked on their door and I introduced myself and I said, "Can I ask you a personal question? Are you Muslim?" Later, she told me how scary my question was for her because she didn't know if I was going to yell at her or hit her or tell her she was wrong and going to hell. I should have been a little more thoughtful and gotten to know them first. But instead I said, "Oh, I am so glad. I'm a pastor and I promise you that you're safe with me." I have learned so much from them about their faith and dedication to their God, who they refer to as Allah. The crazy thing about these three faiths, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, is that we all came from the same person. You've learned about Abraham in the book of Genesis. He was the one who God called to leave his country for a new land that God would show him. There, God would make his name great. He would bless those who blessed Abraham and curse those who cursed Abraham, and all the world would be made great through him. Abraham and Sarah were trying to get pregnant, and it wasn't working for them, so Sarah said, "Here's my servant, maybe she can get pregnant by you." Side note, this is something that happened in the Old Testament. It's not so cool for this to happen in modern times. Abraham and Hagar, the servant, had a baby named Ishmael. Then Sarah got pregnant and had Isaac. At one point, Sarah got really jealous of Hagar and Ishmael and tells Abraham to send them away. Abraham's pretty upset about this because Ishmael is his son. But God comes to him and says, "Do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too." After they are sent away, in a moment when Hagar thinks that she and Ishmael are going to die of starvation and thirst, she cries out to God for protection. God made the same promise at that same time to both Abraham and Hagar. "Don't worry, I will make a great nation from his descendants." The descendants of Abraham and Hagar eventually became the Islamic people. About 600 years after Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad spread the ideas of Islam to people in the Middle East part of the world. Abraham's other son, Isaac, whose mom was Sarah, yes, she was finally able to have a baby after all, he became the beginning of the Jewish people. They followed the one God who led them through the desert and the promised land to love them and be with them always. Those were the same Jewish people about 2,000 years later who met Jesus and learned from him. Many of the people who became followers of Jesus were Jewish first. There were also a lot of people who weren't Jewish who became Jesus followers. We'd call all Jesus followers Christians, or followers of Christ. So what are a few differences between these three religions? Well, each faith has a different founder of sorts. Christians follow Jesus, Muslims, Muhammad, and Jews, Abraham. We each read different scriptures. Christians follow the Bible, Jews follow only the Old Testament, and Muslims follow the Quran. Each of these three religions have different practices, different things they do to show their faith. Christians practice baptism and communion. Muslims follow what's called the 5 pillars of Islam: prayer, giving money to the poor, fasting for an entire month, going to their holy site once in their lifetime, and saying that they believe in Allah. Jewish people practice the Sabbath once a week. That's a day of rest. You may also have some friends who have had a bar or bat mitzvah, and they remember the Passover meal in a special way each year. All three of these faiths believe that Jesus was a real person who did amazing things during his lifetime. But Christians would say that Jesus is the Son of God and is God in the flesh. So that's a little different. But here's the thing. We have so many things in common. First, we all have the same God. We might call God different names like Allah or Yahweh, but we all started with Abraham and God's call on Abraham's life. We all pray. We all believe in helping those who need it a little bit more and believe that that's a really important thing to do. We don't emphasize it, but sometimes Christians and Jews encourage fasting or going without food for a certain amount of time. We'd say that, if possible, going to the Holy Land once in your lifetime is really important. Jewish people would say the same thing about visiting the same part of the world. And finally, I hope everyone who is Christian, Jewish, or Muslim would be able to state what they believe And why? In fact, that's kind of what you're doing in confirmation. You're making a profession of faith in saying, I believe in God the Father Almighty. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son. I believe in the Holy Spirit. One of the things I think is really horrible in our world today is how the news and sometimes people lump all Christians together or all Muslims together or all Jews together. We've heard about some really horrible things in our past that people who were Muslim did against other people, and that's never okay. We hear about wars in the Middle East where Jewish people and Muslim people are fighting over the same land, but most Jews and Muslims just want to live their lives in peace without fighting. And we can't forget that there are plenty of Christians who do really awful things in this world too. So I hope when I hear about violence in places far away or really close by, I won't assume that all people of that faith think the exact same way or do things that are really hurtful. When we focus on the things that we have in common with people of other faiths, we can learn some really amazing things about people, about religion, and about how people are doing fantastic things in the world because of their love for their God. I hope as you grow up, you'll have a curious mind and heart that wants to learn about other people's beliefs and practices. I believe the world will be a better place because we want to focus on what brings us together, not what tears us apart.
Well, denominations, Baptists, Catholics, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and so on. If you looked at today's topic, you probably thought, why do I need to know about this? I get it. It seems like this might not be as important as everything else you're discussing in confirmation. And you're right. It isn't as important. But you already know lots of people who believe different things when it comes to faith in God. It might be good at least to know why. I want you to imagine your friend group over time. Do you hang out with the same group of friends you hung out with last year, or a few years ago, or even 5 years ago? Probably not. And there are reasons, right? Sometimes your friends from elementary school just aren't in your school or in your classes anymore, and you grow apart. Sometimes people move away, and sometimes you get into disagreements with friends and stop being friends because you can't agree. All of those things happen to everybody. Our friend groups changed from time to time. That's what denominations are. They are separate groups of people who decided they believed in Jesus in a different way. When these denominations happen, we often call it a split in the church. Around 1,000 years after Jesus, the Eastern Orthodox Church split from the Roman Catholic Church because they couldn't agree on the nature of the Trinity or whether you could be married and be a priest. 500 years later, Martin Luther wanted to reform, not split the Catholic Church, when he famously nailed 95 theses, things that needed to change, to the church door. At the core of his disagreement was the church charging money so that one could be forgiven by God. That doesn't sound right, now does it? Luther's protest, coupled with the invention of the printing press, led to multiple denominations. These people were called Protestants because they were protesting what the church was doing because it didn't match up with what they were reading in their Bible, which they didn't have access to before the printing press. The United Methodist Church was formed out of the Church of England, which was formed out of the Catholic Church because King Henry wanted to divorce his wife, and the Catholic Church wouldn't let him. So he just made a new church. Even today, the United Methodist Church is splitting. In fact, it has split and come back together several times over the last 300 years. What were the issues? Slavery and inclusion, to name a couple. And there are non-denominational churches too. That label doesn't make any sense at all, since they too have split because they want to be different from all of the other churches who split. Whew. It can be exhausting tracking down everyone's beef. The point is, the Christian church across the world is all one church and multiple churches at the same time. When the Bible isn't particularly clear or it can be interpreted in different ways, that's when we begin to disagree and denominations form. So in a way, it is good to know what divides us. Our church is inclusive of all people. Not all churches are. We have women pastors here. Not all churches do. We baptize babies. Some churches wait until you're old enough to make that decision for yourself. Our church does both. However, all Christian churches, including ours, view Jesus as central. We all believe he is the human form of God on earth. We're all pretty aligned with what he taught and his vision of the world as becoming what God wants for us. We all recognize Jesus' death and resurrection. So just like you share memories of past friendships and may even consider those ex-friends still important to who you are today, the Christian church, all across the world, all of its denominations, is all together on Jesus, which is what matters the most.